Have you ever felt like everything in your life is falling apart? Like there's no way out? Today, we'll explore how the story of Joseph proves that God can turn even the darkest moments into victory. Get ready for a message that can transform the way you face suffering. Joseph was a young man with a pure heart and grand dreams. The son of Jacob, one of God's patriarchs, he was the second youngest of 12 brothers and his father's favorite. Jacob didn't hide his favoritism, gifting Joseph a richly adorned, colorful robe, a present that symbolized love and distinction. But this public display of affection also planted seeds of envy in his brothers' hearts. Joseph wasn't only loved by his father, he also had a special gift, the ability to interpret dreams. One day, Joseph shared 2 dreams with his brothers, dreams given to him by God. In the first, he saw bundles of wheat in the field, and his brothers' bundles bowed down to his. In the second, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. These visions symbolized his future as a leader, but to his brothers, they sounded like arrogance. Their anger grew day by day, fueled by the sight of Joseph's robe and the memory of his dreams. One day, when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers in the fields, they saw an opportunity. From afar, they noticed Joseph approaching, his vibrant robe gleaming in the sun, and they devised a terrible plan to get rid of him once and for all. As Joseph walked unsuspectingly, his mind was likely filled with dreams and hopes. But as he reached his brothers, they seized him and threw him into an empty pit, a cold, dark place with no escape. Imagine the fear and confusion that gripped his heart in that moment. He, who trusted God so deeply, now found himself utterly alone, at the mercy of his own brothers. Their initial plan was to leave him there to die, but greed overtook them. They decided to sell him as a slave to a group of Ishmaelite traders passing by. Joseph was pulled out of the pit, perhaps believing he was being freed, only to be handed over to strangers. These traders took him to Egypt, a foreign land with an unfamiliar language and culture. Meanwhile, Joseph's brothers stained his colorful robe with the blood of an animal and brought it to Jacob, claiming he had been attacked by a wild beast. Jacob, devastated, mourned bitterly for his beloved son, not realizing that Joseph's story was only just beginning. On the journey to Egypt, Joseph might have felt abandoned by God, but he chose to trust. Despite the betrayal and suffering, Joseph believed that God had a greater plan for his life. He didn't know how or when, but he knew God was with him. Reflection. Like Joseph, we often face situations where everything seems against us. We may feel betrayed, alone, or even forgotten, but God never abandons us. The pit that feels like our end may actually be the beginning of something much greater. The challenge is to trust in God's purpose, even when we don't understand the path. As Joseph journeyed to Egypt, he had no idea that his adventure was just beginning and that God had prepared a destiny for him that would not only change his life, but the lives of many others. The journey to Egypt seemed endless. Joseph, now reduced to the status of a slave, walked with his hands bound, surrounded by merchants who saw him as nothing more than a commodity to be sold. He was just a young man, betrayed by those he trusted most, being taken to a foreign land where he knew no one. Yet, even in this moment of apparent abandonment, something inside him whispered that God was with him. Upon arriving in Egypt, the chaos of the bustling marketplace starkly contrasted with the peace of Canaan's quiet fields. Joseph was brought to the slave market, a noisy place filled with shouts, bargaining, and disputes. There, he was purchased by Potiphar, a high-ranking officer and captain of Pharaoh's guard. This moment could have felt like another cruel twist of fate, but Joseph chose to see it differently. He believed God was guiding his steps. In Potiphar's house, Joseph quickly stood out. He was intelligent, dedicated, and trustworthy. Even as a slave, his character remained steadfast. Observing Joseph's honesty and competence, Potiphar placed him in charge of his entire household, entrusting him with his possessions and affairs. Everything Joseph touched prospered because God was with him. Each day, Joseph proved that his faith didn't depend on his social status, but on his trust in the Lord. However, not everything was peaceful. Potiphar's wife, drawn to Joseph's appearance and integrity, began to harass him. She repeatedly tried to seduce him, but Joseph always refused. To him, sinning against his master would have been wrong, but sinning against God would have been far worse. One day, during one of her advances, she grabbed Joseph's cloak, but he fled, leaving the garment in her hands. Enraged by his rejection, she accused Joseph of attempting to assault her. When Potiphar heard his wife's account, he became furious. Even without concrete evidence, his wife's word was enough. Joseph was thrown into prison, once again falling from a position of trust to the depths of despair, both literally and figuratively. Imagine what must have been going through Joseph's mind at that moment. He had chosen to do the right thing, to remain faithful to God, and yet he was being punished. Once again, he had lost everything, but he never lost his faith. God was with him even in prison. The guards soon recognized Joseph's character and entrusted him with responsibilities, appointing him as the administrator of the prison. Once again, he prospered because his faith was his greatest strength. The prison, which could have been a place of despair, became yet another stage of learning for Joseph. Like Joseph, we often face injustices and situations where doing the right thing seems to bring only more pain. But these moments are not the end. They are tests, processes God uses to shape our character and prepare us for something greater. Joseph didn't know it yet, but God's plan was in full motion, and his suffering was merely a part of a much larger purpose. And in the darkness of the prison, Joseph had no idea that one day he would be called to a meeting that would change the course of his life and the history of Egypt forever. Life in prison was harsh, but Joseph did not let the dark environment extinguish his inner light. He faced a choice: succumb to despair or continue trusting that God was with him, even in the most difficult circumstances. Joseph chose faith. His exemplary behavior quickly caught the attention of the prison warden, who placed him in charge of overseeing the other prisoners. Although he was an inmate, Joseph already displayed the leadership qualities God was refining in him. It was in this hostile environment that two new prisoners arrived: Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Both had fallen out of favor and were placed under Joseph's care. One day, Joseph noticed that they looked more distressed than usual. He could have ignored them, focusing on his own pain, but instead, he chose to show compassion. "Why are you so sad?" he asked. The two men explained that they had strange dreams but didn't know their meaning. Joseph, with his unwavering faith, responded, "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer was the first to speak. He described a vine with 3 branches that blossomed and produced grapes. He picked the grapes and placed them in Pharaoh's cup. Joseph, trusting in the wisdom God had given him, explained, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you will once again place the cup in his hand." Encouraged by the positive interpretation, the baker shared his dream. He described 3 baskets of bread on his head, but birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph, with honesty, revealed, "The 3 baskets are also 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will have you executed, and birds will eat your flesh." Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him when he was restored, mentioning his unjust imprisonment and asking for his help to secure his release. And just as Joseph had interpreted, both dreams came true 3 days later. The cupbearer was restored, and the baker was executed, exactly as Joseph had said. However, the cupbearer, now back in the palace, forgot about Joseph. Imagine Joseph's frustration as he realized that the small ray of hope had vanished. Once again, he found himself forgotten and alone. Yet Joseph did not let disappointment erase his trust in God. He understood that waiting was part of God's plan, even though it was hard to see the purpose at the time. Sometimes we feel like Joseph, forgotten or overlooked even after helping someone. But God sees everything. He never forgets us, even when others do. Joseph didn't know it yet, but the moment of his exaltation was drawing near. God was orchestrating something far greater than Joseph could have imagined. 2 long years passed, but something was about to happen in Pharaoh's palace that would change Joseph's life forever. 2 years had passed since the cupbearer was restored to his position in the palace, and Joseph remained in prison. Despite being forgotten, he did not allow discouragement to destroy his faith. Each day in prison was a reminder of his dependence on God, and he continued to serve with excellence, waiting for the moment when God's plan would be revealed. Meanwhile, in the palace, Pharaoh had 2 troubling dreams. In the first, he saw 7 fat cows come out of the Nile River, followed by 7 skinny cows that devoured the first. In the second dream, 7 healthy, full ears of grain were swallowed up by 7 thin and withered ones. None of Egypt's magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams, leaving Pharaoh restless and desperate. It was then that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had accurately interpreted his dreams while in prison. Immediately, Pharaoh ordered that Joseph be brought to him. Joseph was hurriedly taken out of prison, shaved, and dressed properly to appear before the most powerful king in the world. As he entered the throne room, Joseph remained humble, even in the presence of Pharaoh's grandeur. When Pharaoh explained his dreams and asked for their interpretation, Joseph replied confidently, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." With this statement, Joseph made it clear that his wisdom did not come from himself but from the Lord. Joseph explained that Pharaoh's 2 dreams were one and the same. The 7 fat cows and 7 healthy ears of grain represented 7 years of abundance in Egypt, while the 7 skinny cows and withered ears symbolized 7 years of severe famine to follow. "God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do," Joseph said. He not only interpreted the dreams but also offered a plan to save Egypt. Store food during the years of abundance to meet the needs during the years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and clarity. He recognized that the Spirit of God was with Joseph and, in a moment that forever changed the course of his life, appointed him governor of all Egypt. Joseph was given authority, Pharaoh's signet ring, fine linen robes, and a gold chain. In a single day, he went from prisoner to leader of the most powerful nation of the time. With the weight of this new responsibility, Joseph immediately began his work. During the 7 years of abundance, he oversaw the collection and storage of grain in strategically located cities. Under his leadership, Egypt became a hub of provision, prepared to face the approaching years of famine. Despite his exaltation, Joseph did not lose his humility. He understood that his position was not the result of his own strength but of God's sovereign plan. The years of suffering had shaped his character, and now he was ready to fulfill the purpose for which he had been called. At times, we are called to wait for long periods without understanding why doors remain closed. But God always acts at the right time. Joseph's plan was not just to save Egypt, but also to prepare the stage for a reunion that would profoundly change his story. And as the years of abundance passed, something was happening in Canaan that would bring old wounds to the surface and reveal the power of forgiveness. The 7 years of abundance passed just as Joseph had predicted, and Egypt was prepared for the famine that followed. But in Canaan, the famine did not spare Jacob's family. The scarcity became so severe that Jacob heard about grain available in Egypt and sent his sons to buy some, except for Benjamin, the youngest. For Jacob, losing Benjamin would have been unbearable, as he was the last direct link to Rachel, the wife he had loved deeply. Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt, never imagining what awaited them. Upon arrival, they were brought before the governor of the land, none other than Joseph himself. However, they did not recognize him. Joseph, now dressed in Egyptian robes, speaking the language of the land, and occupying a position of power, appeared unrecognizable to them. But Joseph recognized them immediately. Seeing his brothers after so many years unleashed a storm of emotions within him. He felt the pain of betrayal, but also a longing to know if they had changed. Joseph decided to test them. First, he spoke to them harshly, accusing them of being spies. The brothers, terrified, denied it and shared their story, mentioning that they were the sons of a man in Canaan and had another brother who had stayed behind. This was proof to Joseph that Benjamin was alive. He insisted that one of them return to bring Benjamin as proof of their honesty, while the others remained imprisoned. However, in an act of mercy, Joseph allowed them all to leave except for Simeon, who was kept as collateral. Joseph provided grain for his brothers and, in secret, ordered that the money they had paid be placed back in their sacks. When the brothers discovered this on their way home, they were filled with fear, believing it could be used against them as evidence of theft. Upon arriving in Canaan, they recounted everything to Jacob, but he refused to let Benjamin go back to Egypt. He was unwilling to risk losing another beloved son. However, the famine persisted, and soon their provisions ran out. Desperate, Jacob had no choice but to allow Benjamin to go with his brothers to Egypt. He sent gifts and double the money, hoping to appease the governor. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his brother from the same mother, his heart overflowed with emotion. He organized a banquet for them but continued to conceal his identity. Even so, Joseph carried out another test. He ordered that his silver cup be hidden in Benjamin's sack. After the brothers had departed, Joseph sent his servants to intercept them and accuse them of theft. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their clothes in despair and returned to face Joseph. They pleaded for Benjamin's life, offering themselves as slaves in his place. It was at this moment that Joseph saw his brothers' genuine repentance. They were willing to sacrifice themselves to save Benjamin, something unimaginable years earlier. Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He ordered all the Egyptians to leave the room, and with tears in his eyes, he revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt." The brothers were stunned and terrified. But instead of punishing them, Joseph comforted them. "Do not be afraid or blame yourselves for what you did. It was God who sent me ahead of you to save lives." Joseph saw God's divine plan in everything, from his imprisonment to his exaltation. Joseph's forgiveness was complete and transformative. He embraced his brothers, restoring their broken relationship. He then instructed them to bring Jacob and the entire family to live in Egypt, where they would be provided for throughout the remainder of the famine. Sometimes, the deepest wounds become the stage for the greatest miracles. Joseph not only overcame betrayal but used it as an opportunity to demonstrate the power of forgiveness. He did not seek vengeance but reconciliation, reflecting God's love that transforms pain into redemption. And so, Egypt became the new home for Jacob's family, as Joseph prepared for the most emotional moment of his journey, the reunion with his father. The news that Joseph was alive reached Jacob like thunder in the desert of his sorrow. The elderly patriarch, who for years believed that his favorite son had been devoured by a wild animal, could hardly believe it. But his son's insistence and the chariots sent by Joseph himself to fetch the family confirmed the impossible. With tears in his eyes, Jacob declared, "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I want to see him before I die." The journey to Egypt was filled with emotion. Jacob, now advanced in age, traveled with his entire family, carrying not just their belongings but also the hopes of a secure future. When they finally arrived, Joseph ran to meet his father. The reunion was heart-wrenching. Two men embraced, weeping. A father and son separated for decades, now reunited under God's divine purpose. Joseph brought Jacob and his entire family before Pharaoh, who, out of respect for the governor who had saved Egypt, granted them the best land in Goshen. There, Jacob's descendants thrived, finding provision amid the famine that devastated other nations. Jacob lived another 17 years in Egypt, and before his death, he blessed his sons and made Joseph promise to carry his remains back to Canaan, the land God had promised. But after Jacob's death, fear returned to Joseph's brothers. They worried that, now free from their father's presence, Joseph might seek revenge for their past sins. They approached Joseph, pleading for mercy. Once again, Joseph demonstrated a heart shaped by God's grace. He said, "You planned evil against me, but God turned it into good to save many lives, as you can see now." These words, simple yet profound, encapsulate Joseph's entire journey. The suffering he endured was not in vain. The betrayals, the imprisonment, and the injustices all were part of a greater plan. God not only shaped Joseph into a leader, but used his pain to save an entire nation and restore his family. This story teaches us that suffering is not the end. It can be the beginning of something extraordinary if we trust in God. Like Joseph, we all face deserts, betrayals, and periods of apparent abandonment. But if we surrender our pain to God, He is able to transform it into victory. The secret to overcoming suffering is to trust in God's purpose, even when the situation seems hopeless. Joseph's journey is a powerful reminder that no matter how deep the pit we find ourselves in, God always has a plan to lift us up. Suffering is a divine school where we learn lessons of faith, forgiveness, and total dependence on the Creator. And now, I want to hear from you. Which moment in Joseph's story touched your heart the most? Comment below. I want to know what God is saying to you through this story. Also, if you love stories like this, full of practical lessons and deep reflections, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell so you never miss any content. Here, we always strive to bring messages that transform lives. And one more thing, share this video with someone who needs a message of hope today. You could be the person God uses to change someone's day or even their life. Thank you so much for watching. May God bless you all and stay with the wisdom of the Word.